I can't launch an RPG channel and not make a top 10 list. Cue montage. Welcome back, Classic Crew. Now, I feel most of you know me through Monster Hunter or the Dark Souls and Soulsborne journeys I've been on, but I actually used to be really into RPGs. In fact, it was my favorite genre of game, specifically as a teenager when I had the most time on my hands. So I played a ton of RPGs in my late teens, early 20s, and then I basically stopped playing them for a good decade, and it's only recently that I've started to dip my toe back into RPGs. So few warnings on this list. It is probably very outdated because I have not played more of the recent stuff. Doesn't mean I don't want to though. It's also a little bit more leaning towards Square Enix games because I tend to prefer JRPGs over Western RPGs. I've just not found any good RPGs from the West that give me that same like hook that the JRPGs give me. So let's get started with my number 10 choice. We're starting off at Xenogears. Now, unfortunately, this is the only real game that I've completed in the Xeno saga, the other one's called Xeno Saga, in the Xeno franchise. So Xenogears was one of my early RPG titles to introduce me to the genre. It was fantastic, though I have to say, the religious themes threw me off a little bit. When I was younger, I was a lot more into religion, and any kind of a game that touched on religious subjects made me uncomfortable. Despite that, though, the gameplay and the characters were so good. I just really enjoyed having to, you got to level up your character, and basically you got to level up your gears. And I really love the concept of these gears, which is essentially Gundams, despite never having even watched the Gundam shows, which that's a video for another channel and another time. The battle, the scene, the world that we were in, which was this futuristic type world, the characters, that's a game I would love to see come back because I need to replay that game. And the way that that game ended for me was so it was quite climactic because it's the final boss you fight in Gears. I don't think that's a spoiler. And basically, I was down to my last attack. I had no items left to heal. I had nothing. I had no options except to hit X to attack. That was my only option left. The next attack my party was wiped out except one gear, and I had one attack left, and that was the attack that actually won the battle for me. So it was really down to the wire, and I actually missed out most of the ending cutscene because I had to run to the door because there was someone knocking at my door that I had to answer, and you couldn't pause the game. So I really want to play Xenogears again, or in lieu of that, probably picking up the Xenoblade franchise. That's a franchise I really want to get into. I did try Xeno Saga, I think is what it was called, on the PS2 era. Did not like that. That was so much story padding and very little gameplay. It just turned me off right away. So I never got into that one. I think it was called Xeno Saga, where they had, I think, 3 titles in there. Number 9, Final Fantasy VI. This one, oh man, I loved the Super Nintendo era of Final Fantasy as well as the PlayStation 1 era, but the Super Nintendo is where I think Final Fantasy thrived for me. And Final Fantasy VI, or 3 as it's known in the West, was one of the great ones. It had fantastic music. It had a great cast of characters. I think you could even play as 20 different characters in this game. And it was just so cool. It was like this, the battle between basically technology and magic. And I do remember loving the level up system of how you learned it. So it's, again, this one has been 20 plus years since I last played it, but I love the leveling up system where you had to equip, I forget what the name of them was, but your magics basically, or espers, I want to say, I really forget what it was. And you basically had to use that in battle or keep it on you in battle to level them up. So it kind of reminded me of Materia a little bit. And the whole game just gets wild when pretty much you have an apocalyptic moment that happens in the game, which just shifts the entire tone of the story. And it also features one of the best villains. And I think it's strange because Final Fantasy VI is the best reviewed Final Fantasy game ever. It has the highest Metacritic score. And yet it's the one game they are just not touching with remasters. They've done pixel remasters, but they've never gone back and done something like they did with Final Fantasy VII Remake. Or, like my next game on the list, number 8, Final Fantasy IV, but the DS remake. Now, I might be a little bit biased towards the DS version because it played to my nostalgia of... So Final Fantasy IV, I did first play it on the Super Nintendo, which was the old school style with pixels and all that. So when I played it again on DS with the full remaster, the 3D polygons, and a fully orchestrated soundtrack, I was just hit with nostalgia. Now, the thing that I love the most about Final Fantasy IV whether you consider the remake or not. It was really the story. And this, I think, was my first Final Fantasy ever, Final Fantasy 4/2. The story of a knight who regretted his actions and was constantly looking for redemption. There is something about that story, like in any kind of storytelling medium. I love a good redemption story. And so this one here really resonated with just the type of stories I like. The fact that for most of the game, you are this individual, like it's focused around an individual who's seeking redemption, eventually finds it, and then it opens up into your typical Final Fantasy of, we have to save the world against the most evil. I can't say much about the combat or anything else really pulling me, because it offered a lot of what the other Final Fantasy games at the time offered, just with a little bit more polish, but it was really the story and the music. And like that opening cutscene on the Final Fantasy, on the DS remake, just so beautiful. To this day, I get goosebumps watching it. And the I think it's called the Red Wing theme. That is still one of my favorite themes to this day. That one, and also the love music, which I forget what it is. Final Fantasy VII, the original. This one I nerded out a ton on my original video where I pledged to 100% the game. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you can get my full nostalgic impressions on that video. But Final Fantasy VII was one of the defining games of my childhood, teenagehood specifically. It was a game I wanted to play for a long time by seeing my friends play it. So when I finally got a copy of it for myself, just the aesthetics, the characters, the music, the story, just all of that felt so satisfying from a video game. Maybe it was the new like 3D graphics at the time, along with the story, the theme, you know, this like kind of futuristic cyberpunk and the music. But yeah, it just checked off everything that made me like feel so satisfied of playing the game. And I have to say, like, the Midgar section was my favorite, which is why I love Final Fantasy VII Remake so much, because it focuses just on the part that left the biggest impression on me. But anyways, let's move on and not dwell too much on this. Next, another Square Enix classic, Kingdom Hearts, the original. I can't say 2, 3, or any of those other spin-offs had the same impact on me. But Kingdom Hearts 1 is one of my favorite RPGs. I really think the original captured something the others kind of lost along the way, in that it can tell a nice, coherent story. It stands on its own. It's not too convoluted, and it's just fun. Like, you as the player are invested in the character, are invested in the story. The fact that, you know, you're on this peaceful, nice, beautiful island with your friends, and then everything gets taken from you, and you have to go like across the whole universe to like shut down the Heartless Gates. Just that felt so compelling to me. And it's funny because this kind of wasn't on my radar at the time, even though I played RPGs. I picked up Kingdom Hearts in a bargain bin. I was like, oh, the cover looks cool. And I remember Sora, like the character design. I was like, I don't really care about this. He kind of reminded me of another anime that was out at the time that I didn't care for. So Sora left a bad impression on me, but the cover was just so cool. And, you know, I love Goofy and the Disney characters, Donald Duck as well. So I would go on to play Kingdom Hearts 2 with a lot of anticipation. Didn't get the same vibe out of that. And 3, which on my original channel, I did share my review of that, and I was very disappointed with it because the story just, it went into such strange directions. I just was no longer pulled into it. Kingdom Hearts kind of lost a lot of what I thought made it charming in the first. And it's unfortunate because it got a little bit too formulaic. Even when you go from planet to planet, it's like, here's another Disney film, replay the film story. Whereas in the original, I feel the Disney characters were more intertwined with Sora's story and the Heartless story. So, oh, and the collectathon is another thing I loved about that game. Finding all the chests, finding all the puppies, the Dalmatians, like that I loved. I love Skyrim and having all the recipes checked off. So from a completionist standpoint, Kingdom Hearts 1 was very satisfying, on top of being just an amazing RPG. Next up, I couldn't quite pick between these, the Mario and Luigi games, but I'm going to put Bowser's Inside Story as my favorite because Bowser has always been one of my favorite characters in the Mushroom Kingdom IP, if you will. And this one really stood out. And the fact that I could play... So Mario, I want to talk about Mario RPG because that was my first one. And I was going to put it on the list. You know, that is the first time that we saw the Mario IP merged with an RPG. And it worked so well and it really pulled me in. It might have been one of those... That might have been the game that got me into RPGs. I'm not sure, but... The fact that I was already into RPGs when Bowser Inside Story played it, that I got into it and loved it, you know, despite there was no necessarily nostalgia aspect to it. is why I'm putting Bowser's Inside Story on this list with just a special mention to Mario RPG, because we all know how great Mario RPG is and what it did. But Bowser's Inside Story, I think, really highlights the potential of what a Mario RPG can be. And it was really kind of I can't say it's the pinnacle of the Mario and Luigi series because there's a few I haven't played in there, but every Mario and Luigi game I have played have been so fantastic. I love that you get to explore the kingdom. There's the whole RPG element, but it has very fun combat with the whole precision timing of the buttons and the mini games. And the fact that you get to play Bowser in this one, it's just great. And there's also the collectathon. And I think that's a very key thing that I might like about my RPGs is the collectathon aspect of it, because love collecting, completing check marks, and completing all those things. Next up, and I'm really surprised this was not on my number one spot. It's on the number one spot of a lot of lists, but Chrono Trigger. And this is a game I need to replay as well because it left such a big impact on me when I originally played it. I think I might have been it 2 or 3 times since. Just, again, the music, the characters, the setting. What a fun RPG this was. The going through time, getting to re-experience, and how like the story meshed through time, and you really got attached to the world, and you could see the change in time of, oh, this happened in the past, so therefore it impacted the future and the present. I can't believe there hasn't been another RPG that has done quite as good of a job as Chrono Trigger has when it comes to time traveling and just the flow of time and how you as a character impacted things as you're going through time to try to save the world. It was really uniquely made, and I have to say its sequel, Chrono Cross, highly disappointed to me. Like it captured not even close to the magic that Chrono Trigger had. It had some good music, some okay characters, but yeah, the story was just nothing next to Chrono Trigger. And the fact that you had all these different endings was even more enticing to just play it over and over and try to figure out what happens if you do this, what happens if you do this. Like it just really hooked you as a player. And the gameplay was great too. The fact that you had all these combos with your characters, and depending on which characters you want to use, you could have different strategies. And the music. I think the music really wins me over in RPGs. Next up, let's go into our number 3 spot, which is Nier Automata, which this one is holds a really special place, as they all do. These are my top 10. Nier Automata, the game that I started playing because everyone else was playing it, couldn't get into it, didn't love it, and then picked it up later during the pandemic and got hooked, just played all the way through it, and got I'm pretty sure I was crying at the end of this one because what a beautiful ending. And it's a game, I go off on a full review if you want to check that out in my original channel, but this is just a beautiful game. It's a little bit different than my typical RPGs because it's a lot more actiony, but honestly, in my modern RPGs, I think I prefer the more action-based where you're moving more and have to be a little bit more precise in your combat. But it's really the world building, the music, and it's that emotional hook that they deliver at the end. That payoff, oh man, if there wasn't that ending payoff, this thing wouldn't even be on my list. I'd be like, yeah, it's a fun RPG, but the fact that they delivered something so powerful at the end of that game is what puts this so high on my list. Nier Automata is a game I recommend to everyone. I consider as a masterpiece of a video game just in general, and so highly recommend on my end. Number 2, this is another recent one, and I am thrilled that I discovered this game, Persona 5. But Persona 5 is, again, so just such a well-crafted, first of all, the story's fantastic, but I love the social elements and the combat elements and how it blends together. I was never like, oh, I want to go fight, or there's some RPGs where I feel there's too much padding between the fights. This one, Persona 5, you spend a lot of time not fighting, but I was so invested as in the characters and developing them and doing the social points, leveling up my friendships. And this is wild because I dabbled in the Persona franchise when I was younger. I think it was on the PS1. I dabbled on Persona 2. It might have been on PS2. I forget what platform it was. I didn't make it far into Persona 2 because I just didn't like it. I felt the controls were stiff, and I didn't like the whole theme of demons and stuff. But Persona 5, despite having the same themes, just really connected in a just really satisfying way. And it's the characters. I think the characters are really what drove it for me, and just had a really good time. I felt like I was living in Japan and making friends and saving the world. Honestly, I could have just kept playing the social aspects, the mini games, and have been just as satisfied, building up my friendships and all that. I love doing that. And then the combat was fun too, and was really satisfying. The music on this just flowed so well. Funny enough, this game got a lot of praise for its UI design. That was one of the things that I first saw, and I was like, oh, this is ugly. I didn't like how the UI looked. I was like, this is too loud for like loud sake. But after playing it, I appreciate for what it is. And it's just so good. I have special shout out to the freaking weapon shop, the music in the weapon shop. I would just hang out in the weapon shop and just listen to that music because it was so good. And then lastly, I feel this is a bit of a cop-out in my number one spot, but it is Final Fantasy VII Remake. And right now I am going through my 100% run, so going it through a second time. This game captures everything, and it is bolstered by the fact that it is playing to my nostalgia so well. It's a game that I actually do get a little frustrated when people complain, oh, it's just 1/4 of the original game. Oh, you're paying... And I just want to shut down those haters because those people have not played the game. Like, it's obvious that you have not played Final Fantasy VII Remake if you are making those criticism that it's a chopped up game. Yes, it is inspired from a piece of an older game, but it stands well as its own game. And I feel and believe it delivers entirely on the full value, the full package. It's a full price game. And so those haters, they just got to play this game because the combat is fun, the story's amazing, the characters are amazing, the music is freaking fantastic. And there is just enough in here so when you are done the story, like, it's the perfect time investment. I think it's like a 30-40 hour game if you're not going for completion and you feel satisfied through it. It's so much more rewarding if you've played the original. I can't speak to what it's like to play it without the context of the original. And I love that the game can stand on its own, and by the end of it, without spoiling anything, it does suggest that it's not just a simple remake, but it is actually, it lives within the world of the original without undoing what the original did. And so for anyone who's a fan of the world of Final Fantasy VII, it is just something so special. Like, they've done it so right, and I'm just so thrilled to see what the next two parts is. I'm going to get into Crisis Core, which is another one I didn't get into with the remake coming. And I can't get enough of this Final Fantasy VII business. So that is why we're dedicating a lot of videos on this channel to Final Fantasy VII Remake. And then I'm going to have to make a list of all the other RPGs I want to play because, as you may have noticed, there's a lot of good ones that are not on this list, but there's a lot of games I do want to play. Very brief mention, Final Fantasy XIV, of course. We've got the Xenoblade games. I've got the Tales of franchise, the Dragon Quest stuff, just so much stuff out there. And we're going to talk about in another video, which I will see you on. And until next time, keep it classy. Do, 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 do. Subscribe.